Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by InView, LawView's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm Emma, your host today, and I'm super excited to be joined by Lauren Zajac. Lauren is the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer at Extrahop, and today we're going to be talking all things your career, cybersecurity, how we kind of can embrace ChatGPT, AI, and get your kind of thoughts on that, and then also talk about leadership. How do you build a legal team from scratch, and really get your take on that, having had to do it, I guess, a couple of times now by the sounds of things. So I would love if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and your career and kind of what's brought you to where you are today.
Sure. Super excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So I have been in-house my whole career. Kind of an odd, not the normal course. I will say one of the things that kind of turned me on. So I've been in-house in tech for the entirety of it. One of the things that turned me on to that is I had a kind of unique perspective given to me as I was growing up. So my dad was a engineer and ultimately a CEO in tech companies.
Oh, wow.
So we were always surrounded by the latest gadgets, right? We were the first kids on the block to have a computer, that kind of thing. So technology was always around me. Now, let's just say, maybe after 30 plus years, I kind of can be considered a technologist, but I'm not, right? That's not what my undergrad degree was in or anything. But I knew that I loved kind of the innovation of that. And because he had that position, I was able to see early on. So back up early on, I was, the story goes, and I don't even remember, but 7 or 8 years old, put my hand on my hip and said I was going to be a lawyer and never changed my opinion. I don't know where that came from. It probably came from the fact that I was a fairly argumentative child and somebody said you'd make a good lawyer. But at any rate, I stuck with that. But because of my dad's position, I was able to see and meet and be blown away by someone in the position of general counsel. I didn't even know that was a thing. And from that point on, I was just in love with the fact that this person was in technology, which I thought was really cool, and being a lawyer, which I said I was going to be. And so, fast forward 30 plus years, and I've been doing that, and it's exactly where I feel like I'm supposed to be.
That's such an amazing story for so many different reasons. One, I think to know what you want to be at that age is so rare. To then actually find that you enjoy that career and do it is another thing, because quite often we think we know what we want to be, but, doesn't end up what we want to be. And to also get the, I guess, that exposure so young to know that you could have a career as a lawyer in-house and in tech, like that's super rare. And did you finish your studies and go straight into like a junior in-house position? Was that how it kind of awesome?
Yep. Yeah, I did the traditional summer associateship while I was in law school. So a firm in New York and a firm closer to home. I live in the Boston area. And then I just started papering with resumes at every tech company I could find. And I ended up going right into, it was definitely a trial by fire, right? Like I did coming out of law school, but I got really lucky and I had a really great mentor. So I was really the second lawyer that this tech company had hired. And the general counsel still is a great mentor to me. And it's funny, I can remember the first couple of, right, it was just observing for several months that someone in that position would take, put that investment in and take the time to teach a young lawyer. But I can remember listening to the first contract negotiation calls and then the first one I did. And I tell my lawyers that are on my team now the stories and kind of cringe at how I addressed an indemnification, right? I didn't know anything, but it was a great learning experience. I feel really lucky to have had it.
Oh, that's so cool. And I think what we're going to be talking about today is a lot about, I guess, the new technology that's coming out, how as lawyers we can embrace, what do we need to be aware of, and a lot of that is around, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. So I think it would be great if you can tell us a bit about where you're working working now, what the company does, and why you have got such I guess, so much experience in this space now.
Yeah. Yeah, so prior to my role at Extrahop, I had spent 14 years actually at an employee recognition company, um, and did not have a ton of kind of depth of experience in cyber or in data protection, data privacy. However, that company, employee recognition, right, we were processing personal
Mm,
information. It was also a native Irish company. So, right, the beginning of this whole movement for data protection, data privacy was the GDPR. And one of the first places that came to be was in Ireland. And so we were cross border transferring between Ireland and the US. So I really got kind of steeped into this at the time a new area of data privacy, data protection, and then became the data protection officer for that company. And so after spending 14 years starting to look for something new, I was really intrigued with the whole right learning about how to not only understand the tech, but how to bring articulate that risk to a company,
mm.
to my executives, to my board. I really thought like this is a great jump to make into cyber, and so I then had the opportunity to join Extrahop, which is a network detection and response company. What's really cool is they were started as a network company, right? They were a load balancing and network solution, and so there's a great bit of expertise there. What the company does now is network detection and response is part of right this whole cyber defense, cyber awareness practice that you're seeing, solutions that you're seeing companies buy. And we are able to be within a network and be able to identify vulnerabilities and risks, which, from my perspective, especially as a lawyer, and having been in a company that was right doing things that necessarily brought
Mm,
risk, to be able to have that visibility in real time and see the risks coming up. If I had the tool that I now, if I had Extra Hop tool doing what I was doing before, it would have made my life a lot easier. So it's been really kind of a very seamless transition, taking that experience, being sort of in a buyer stance, and then moving into a place where, wow, this is something that really every company needs.
yeah, wow, that's incredible. And I mean, it sounds like you've got a pretty deep knowledge of the technology itself, as well as the legal side around that. Has that been something you've had to develop over years? Like, how much of a, I guess, because it's changing so quickly, right? So how do you keep up with that?
I think, I mean, one of the things that I think is so cool about being in-house in tech, and I sort of joked about it before, right? I don't consider myself a technologist, and I always kind of take the same approach when I join a new company. I want to understand the tech from the people that built it. I
Mm,
want to understand the tech from the people that sell it. That to me is the most effective, the best way that I can be counsel
mm,
to a company like. So that's always the first couple of months I spend kind of digging in. So, right, tell me what you would tell me, salesperson, sell it to
yeah.
me. And then let's talk about, like, let me build a relationship with you, developers, and tell me how, what's your roadmap look like and why are you looking to add this functionality? I think if the best in house counsels really understand the product and get as deep of an understanding of the tech as you can quickly,
Mm.
because, right, you're negotiating contracts, you're trying to mitigate a specific set of risks that have to do fundamentally with the technology and the product.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love what you say about sell it to me. Like what's like what is it that you can't what is your pitch? What is the reason that companies should have this? What from your sort of standpoint, and this can be from a company wide and what lawyers, I guess, in-house lawyers need to be looking at is what would be some of the biggest cybersecurity threats that you see facing companies today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of risks. I think software vulnerabilities, right? Tech companies are always partnering with other tools, they're bringing other technology in, right? Software vulnerability is a problem. I think this concept, and you mentioned it earlier, AI, chat GPT, brings that issue to a whole new scale, right?
Mm,
We know that ChatGPT was the fastest growing app, and we know that almost everybody has a use case for
Mm.
it, right? Students to developers to lawyers, etc. So I think that's a kind of software vulnerability, and software vulnerability as a general topic is one of the biggest areas of cyber risk. But I think the other piece is we're still seeing phishing attacks as being the biggest area of risk, and that's a human component. So I think the same things that I saw at my previous company, right? How do we raise awareness? How do we train people, right? Because phishing is necessarily there's a human component. Somebody clicks on, an email or a text, and suddenly you're in a cyber situation. Phishing attacks are still the most common form of cyber attack. That brings in the human component. I saw the same thing at WorkHuman as I'm seeing at Extrahop, and that is the training is key. That's where legal comes in. Obviously, there is a component of compliance that sits in the legal department. And training for every type of risk is under our umbrella. Training specifically with respect to cyber risk is one of the places that I've brought those two worlds together. I think it's really important not only to understand the product and the solution when you're trying to comprise a compliance effort, a training effort, but you also have to understand your company, right? I'm pretty lucky that I sit now in a cybersecurity company, and the level of awareness is pretty high, right? A lot of the folks that work at Extrahop now have a very deep understanding of cyber threat, cyber risk. So my training and my compliance effort there is very different than it would be at a company where that level of understanding isn't the same. So I think one of the things to combat the human component risk, the human error risk, if you will, of phishing or smishing or all of these other ways of attack, is to tailor your compliance, tailor your training approach to what the population that you're working in. Make sure you understand sort of the level of understanding
Mm.
and tailor the compliance there, right? You can start with basic security awareness, move to a more detailed anti-phishing campaign, and then deeper practices. I think those things are really, especially when you're demonstrating or play acting a real cyber threat, you really expose a bunch of weaknesses that you wouldn't understand in any other way,
Mm.
right? So assume, like, let's all sit down at a table. Let's assume we're in a threat situation. What would we do? How would we follow policy? And who are the people that we would contact? Real world situation training, I think, is the best thing you can do to get at least a certain level of your employees trained in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think it's like you say, like you are in a cybersecurity company, so already the understanding is just a little bit higher, but it's about understanding that, and then okay, so where are there gaps, and how can we kind of tailor the training? You mentioned ChatGPT, AI. I think it's a hard topic for us not to discuss. While we're having this sort of conversation. So, with the increasing use of those sorts of tools, what are the unique kind of cybersecurity challenges that arise because of them? And how can you mitigate these sorts of risks?
Yeah. I mean, ChatGPT is an interesting one. I know that certain industries, right, industries that rely on sensitive data, healthcare industries and the like,
Mm,
have taken a stance that they've banned
okay.
ChatGPT, at least internally. Um, I get that. I understand as a lawyer, if I was in that industry, that's probably the stance I would take. I think, in tech generally, one of the things that in-house lawyers that are similarly situated to myself, we're struggling to balance, right? This is a broadly used tool. We know it's effective, and we know that developers use it, and that it makes their jobs easier. It makes time to development faster, et cetera. So how do you balance the use of that with the risks? Well, the risks are, you put a snippet of code into ChatGPT or anything related to that, you're risking an intellectual property issue. You might inadvertently share trade secrets. Um, and we know that these models learn the more, you're inputting. So one of the things that we have done, just by way of example, is and I think it comes back to something I was implying before, right? Building relationships. with all of the teams that you are necessarily responsible
Mm,
for protecting, mitigating risk for, is key. I think before, so we've written a policy. We've not banned it totally, but we've tried to mitigate the risk by writing a policy that balances those two things. The only way that we could strike the right balance is to really learn how, for example, our developers were using it, right? And giving them not permission per
mm,
se, but creating a relationship so that there was psychological safety for them to share. This is how I'm using it. This is how I need to use it. And that helped us to draft the policy that here are the places you can use it. Here's what you shouldn't do. Here's what an actionable like violation of this policy would be. And in that way, sort of creating the lanes of use and limiting the risk of potential IP issues or the like.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense actually. And I think so from the legal team perspective, putting that policy together, talking to the teams, that's the role that you've played with that in the business in terms of like making a safe space for it to be used. How about within your own team? How are you utilizing AI and all these tools that are available now?
Yeah, it's been a topic of discussion. I think it's interesting to hear everyone's perspective, right?
Yeah.
Lots of folks on my team have kids that are in school who are trying to
Yeah.
use it, right? And we're looking and saying, well, should we try to use it for policy? Should we try some of these things that are sort of longer term
Mm,
tasks that are a little bit more templatized? I would say, it on balance, we're not relying on it tremendously. I think, especially in tech, where the nature of your advice is very much changeable with the pace and the innovation. Not a lot of our work, except for, as I said, the policies and things, not a lot of our work can be kind of pushed through a tool like ChatGPT,
mm,
but I can see other uses, right? For
mm.
sure. If you weren't sort of moving at a pace, if you weren't directing specific advice to whatever issue comes onto your plate that day or that minute or, that hour, I think there would be a broader use. But for us, it's not a ton of use.
What are some of the ethical concerns with using AI, if, like from a legal standpoint, or even just the business? You mentioned obviously there's kind of IP related issues that come with using these sorts of tools. What other kind of ethical considerations do you need to consider?
Yeah, I think there's less of a work product doctrine sort of in-house. I can see like there are ethical issues there. I think, from our perspective and the kind of practice that we do as attorneys in-house, we haven't come up with kind of on point, here's an ethical issue with us as in-house counsel using this tool. But then again, right, we're always of the mindset of balancing risk versus reward. I think the fundamental ethical issues are whenever you're generating something that is supposed to be work product, your original authorship, right? That's where the fundamental ethical issues come in. And I can see where those abound across a whole.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point as well. I think we're all kind of at this point where we want, whether you're in legal or other aspects of the business, you're wanting to embrace AI. Like it's this hot topic. It does all these things. And it's like, how do I embrace it? Where can I embrace it? But like, where's the line as well? And it's all such a somewhat gray area at the moment. And I guess it's just, like you say, case by case scenario at the moment.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I would you obviously have got so much knowledge in this space, but I know that one of the things that I really was excited to talk to you about today is your experience in building a legal team. Um,
Mm.
Tell us about your experience across your career with, I guess, being in legal teams and also then having to go on to build your own team. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Mark your calendars for June 11th, 2024 because InView's conference, InView Connect, is coming back to London for another year. Whether you're a seasoned in-house legal leader or just starting out your journey in-house, InView Connect has something for everyone. Secure your in-person or virtual spot now at inview.lawview.com and join us for the day to learn, share and connect. We can't wait to see you there.
I think, just by circumstance, I have sort of found a sweet spot in tech companies that are somewhere between, 200 million and a billion revenue. So I think that is necessarily colored how I build legal teams. In a larger company, you have the luxury of hiring kind of subject matter experts in litigation and intellectual property and, contract negotiation. You don't have that luxury at this sort of space, but it's kind of where I live. And so I think that's really how I have approached building teams. That's led me to look for a certain kind of person, right? Someone who is up to the challenge of the pace and innovation that happens in tech. Someone that's not afraid of um, the challenge that that can bring, right? Something that you have to do that's time sensitive, or something that you have to do that's sort of maybe the first time you've done it. I think the characteristics of the people that I have hired in building really great legal teams, and I think, I've been part of them early on in my career, and I saw some of these things, even if I didn't articulate these characteristics to myself. I sort of saw them exemplified over time. But certainly at WorkHuman, I had the pleasure of building a team there, and at Extrahop, I have as well. And I think the commonalities of those two teams are much like I talked about before: willingness to understand the product, right? And it's one of the things I say to all the lawyers that I hire, right? We are here to support the build and selling of a product. So it's best, right? I would advise you to go try to understand the product. And so someone that's willing to come in and roll up their sleeves, even if they've not ever been in technology, how can I understand this product, and how can I understand how it would be sold, and what I need to know to protect it and to contract around it, et cetera. I think the other thing is, and I've sort of intimated some of this, but a willingness to roll up your sleeves and do things that maybe aren't in your wheelhouse.
Mm.
Again, right, in a smaller or a mid-sized company, you don't have the luxury of, let's call the litigation expert all the time. So people that are willing to understand that we're all a team here to support the sale and the build and sale of a product, that might mean that you're asked to put your legal hat on and do something that you may not have done before. So that's something that I definitely look for in when I'm building teams. I think the other piece is, and people always talk about in-house lawyers being more not really lawyers or business people. I think that's true, and so we'll take it. I think really good in-house legal teams are mostly business people, and so there's a lot that goes into that, which is more than just giving advice, or on top of just giving advice. You wanna help sometimes guide a process, right? "Well, this doesn't exactly work, so let me tell you what I've seen has worked somewhere else, and by the way, here's the legal advice or the contract or the" right? So that's a key thing. You have to sort of balance at every interaction, the business advice, and having some good sort of general business knowledge helps, but willing to the willingness to kind of give that advice and guidance on top of the legal advice, I think is key. Um, and I think the last thing is maybe, I think, and I will say I probably get negative kind of commentary for this, but I think sometimes lawyers take themselves too seriously. One of the things that I have found that has served me really well in building teams is to hire folks that don't take themselves too seriously. I think, sometimes we lose the fact that we, especially in tech, in innovative, fast-moving tech, there's an element of fun that should be there.
Mm.
And so I always look for people who aren't, yes, you're a subject matter expert, and yes, you're a legal representative of this company, and those are serious things. I'm not saying that our job isn't serious, but someone that is willing to kind of take the lumps and move through some of that with some humor.
Mm.
You spend so much time with people in our jobs, whether you're remote or not. Being able to have a laugh or to share some humor in that and not take yourself too seriously, I think is key.
Oh, I think that's so true as well. And it's, work is work, but and we spend so much time at work, and you have to enjoy it. It's so important. And what I find so interesting about how you've built teams and what you look for is everything you've mentioned, is their soft skills. They're, obviously these people have a legal background, they've got experience, but what you're hiring on and what you're basing your team around is all the soft skills. It's all the other stuff around that make that person an individual, that is kind of how you basically build your teams, which I think is really, it's a good reminder as well of like the importance of just being yourself, and bringing all those aspects of yourself to an interview or to, an application. How then, when you're looking at all those soft skills, how does diversity and inclusion come into that when you're building a team and making sure that is, representative of a wider community?
Hugely, hugely. It is one of the things that is so important to me. I mean, a lot of what I do outside of my full time job is to support those efforts in a number of ways. I'm on the board of Massachusetts Special Olympics. I support a number of nonprofit organizations that are focused on women in tech and bringing women and girls, bringing exposure to them that there are careers in tech. So that's hugely important to me personally.
Mm.
The way that I bring it, and it's interesting because now at Extrahop, at least in the last 4 months, I am running legal and HR. So I'm
Wow.
able to bring a lot of this perspective into how we're building the culture, how we're recruiting, how we're hiring. Um, what we have landed on, and I very much agree with this, is we're not sort of landing on specific quotas for diverse hiring, but we are making sure that there is a percentage of diversity in the slate of candidates for a particular hire. And I think when you do that and you model that as a practice, it's really interesting how organically that grows. It's one of the things I really kind of beat the drum heavily on when I took the HR role a few months back. This is how we're going to do this. We're going to remove any microaggressions and make sure that our hiring and recruiting language is as gender neutral as possible, and that it doesn't have microaggressions to any other minority underrepresented group. And I started without even having to sort of set that as a policy. I saw other leaders start to model that behavior. So I think my perspective on this whole topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is, I think as leaders, we have an obligation to find the way that works with our belief system and model that, right?
Mm.
However you want to do that, whether you want to bring in a majority of underrepresented people into your next line leadership, great. Whether you want to have, right, a slate of candidates that always has a certain percentage as underrepresented, that's great too. But I think it catches on, is my point. I think the more that you start to behave in that way, and model that that's an important part of your leadership, then people jump on board and maybe see other ways to do that than they've thought about themselves.
Yeah, I really like that. And someone actually said to me not long ago, is that DEI is a practice, not a policy. And that's how it should be seen. Like, how are you going to practice equity and inclusion and with the result of diversity? And I really like that because it is a practice. We're all finding the way that we want to, how we're going to practice it, and tinkering with it and getting to a point where, and it's different for everyone, which I think is really key to remember as well. What about, obviously your background, you're in tech, it's kind of lean, you're trying to do more with less. How do you allocate amongst a team when you're also very mindful of obviously not wanting them to be stressed and burnt out, and how do you manage that as a leader?
I think the it's interesting, because I think we all tend to be want to show up in a certain way, especially leaders. But one of the things, right? I'm a mom of now three teenagers. I have, for the better part of my career, been balancing motherhood and a full time career. More so in my last role, I had a lot of my team that at similar times, right around like a 5 year span, a lot of them were starting families. And so one of the things I really focused on was to make a big to do, right? To really model, like kind of model hard, like I'm leaving now because I have X, Y, and Z that I need to do for my kids. And I purposely did that because, I know we all have, you want to impress the boss, you want to stay late. And unless as a leader you allow for that balance, then people aren't going to take it, right? They'll find other ways to do it. But the more I did that, the more I could see, especially the parents of young kids, right? They were like, "Oh, okay." And they started to come to me and tell me, "Well, I have this thing, but I'm gonna work this," right? So it became almost an organic balance when they were able to sort of say, "This is how I'm going to work out my own work-life balance.
Mm,
Now that I've seen you, I know I saw you go off to your daughter's volleyball game," or what have you. I think that's one of the you're never gonna be able to address that by saying, "You should take a day off," right? That
mm,
never works. I think you need to we're all human beings, and we need, especially as leaders, to model the fact that we are human beings. We have a life. As much as we talked about spending so much time at work, there is life outside of work, and acknowledging that, allows, I think, people to be comfortable, to do their job and to have a life outside. And I think what I saw in that team, what I'm seeing in my team now is the more that I do that, the more dedicated people become, right? They appreciate that you understand that there are multiple aspects of a person.
mm. It's so true. And as someone who is, reports to a manager and sees leaders in the business, it's if someone says, oh, we've got flexibility, you can leave early if you need to do something, just it's more about, the outcomes. But if you then see them working really late, working really hard, you don't feel like you can do that. Like, you don't feel like you've got
No,
permission to do that. You feel like you're the one slacking off, leaving early.
that's right.
So it is such a top down sort of effect of like, you need to demonstrate that. And like, I can see why, by the way that you've done that, that has just given your team, and it probably took a little bit of time to be like, oh, we can do that, like this isn't just a once-off thing. We can do that. We can balance our lives. And that's ultimately just going to have people that want to stay with you and work with you for longer, which is, then you're kind of stopping having to rebuild and rehire and spend all that time and energy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it creates, I mean, I think, how creating a cohesive team is part of it as well. And I think at least in my most recent experiences, doing that created a different level of connection, right? I was able to know about and watch their kids grow up and right, like how did the game go or how did parent teacher conference go? That's a connection that carries through the rest of your day, and I think it's underrated a bit, I think.
Absolutely. What are some, I guess, as the legal landscape is changing, how are you within your team innovating to meet the business's demands from like a skills and kind of, I guess, yeah, just as the advice and things you need to support the business with change, how are you adapting with you and your team?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's interesting when you run a lean team,
Mm,
right? You're for lots of different reasons, you're less likely to rely on expensive outside counsel. I'm seeing an interesting thing. I mean, one of the things that's most challenging, is this in the labor and employment area where there's so much change, right? Especially in the United States, and there's a pretty big difference between one state to the other
mm,
in any particular issue. So those are the changes, most recently that we're having, we're being challenged to keep up with. But I've seen and we're using a service like this. I've seen an interesting thing happen with some of the labor and employment firms.
mm,
They're kind of creating these portals, and it's not a new approach, but for this particular area, it's brilliant, where they are not only providing kind of real-time updates on state law changes and federal law changes to employment, but they're also, sort of on-demand kind of TED Talks and resources, not only that, like, legal teams, my team can log into and use to be educated, but also for HR professionals. I
mm,
think, from my perspective, especially with a lean legal team, when there's so much change happening in that landscape, a really strong partner with HR is key. So if you can educate sort of both of the teams and rise the level up at the same time, you're going to mitigate a tremendous amount of risk, and you're going to have a better approach to it just when people are more knowledgeable. So I think that's really cool, and one of the ways that we're trying to stay on top of changing laws.
Yeah, and I can only imagine, like, I'm here in New Zealand, but we've got team in the US, and yeah, the fact that you've even got it different across different states to try and stay on top of that would just be overwhelming, I think, to say the least,
Yeah.
especially if it's
Yeah.
changing quickly. We've talked
Yes.
a bit about, I guess, the demands of in-house. It's fast paced, and how you've kind of modeled that work-life balance to your team. What has your journey with wellness been throughout your legal career? It's a demanding legal career. You're now wearing a few hats as chief legal officer, HR. How do you look after yourself?
That's been a journey in and of itself too. I think, very early on in my kind of adulthood, I like, before it was even a thing, I was very much about practicing yoga, and I think there's a ton of benefits for that, but I definitely found, especially when I had younger kids, right, trying to squeeze in a practice, even a home practice, it became more challenging, and so probably when I was in my maybe, like, late 20s, early 30s, I started meditating,
Mm,
and I have now tried to do that almost every single day.
wow.
It's one of the things that I talk to, my team, my HR team. What I find so fascinating is, and it's funny because I'm very much a proponent of it, and people are always surprised when I say it, but what I have found, and everyone says, "Oh, it's so hard to do," and I always have these other thoughts when I'm trying to do it, and I always say, "Well, that's the point," right? We're always thinking. Part of meditation is, I look at it as the same as you're going to the gym and you're training your muscles. When you're meditating, you're helping to create neural pathways, you're helping to create a practice of removing yourself from the constant frenetic thought process. I have found that it helps me be a better decision maker, especially in my job, to be a little more calm in the storm when things are swirling, right? So I can sort of stand in, okay, this is my value. I've got this. I'll make the right decision. So that is, if I had to point to one thing that is my wellness go to, it is meditation for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I always kick myself not trying to give it a go more often and actually stick at it, because anyone that meditates will tell you how beneficial and how much it's changed their well-being. And I think it's just
Yeah,
getting on the journey of, like, becoming a habit and sticking with it, because that's the hardest part, right? Is like creating a
it
habit to
is.
do it and actually just doing it every single day. And then once you start to see the benefits, you wouldn't even have to think about it because you'll feel it when you haven't, right? You'll feel that
You'll miss
change.
it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like how you say, like, it doesn't need to be a long thing as well. Like, you don't have to spend an hour at yoga to do it. Like, it can be a micro moment in the day.
Yeah, there were days where I would, like, a minute, 2 minutes, and it was enough to get me through the day.
That's it's incredible, really. And is that something you kind of have brought into your team as well, and to the wider business, in terms of, like, being mindful and looking after your well-being?
Yeah, I definitely have, in at different, inflection points, brought it to really all of my teams. I mean, it was, wonderful at my employee recognition company where there was that thread of well-being and wellness all the way along. There was more of a natural kind of juxtaposition of those, or bringing together of those 2 things. But even especially now wearing the HR hat, at Extrahop, we definitely are bringing wellness into our workplace, even remote. We're starting a yoga practice. We're bringing meditation to the teams. So we're kind of doing it at a broader scale than just my team. But yeah, any place I can bring that in, I mean, I will talk about that all day long.
Mm. Well, you've kind of inspired me to start giving it a go, because I am early on in my motherhood life and I just feel like I'm constantly, the brain is in a million places at once. So I think it's actually probably the best time for me to start just trying.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I love it.
I've just loved speaking to you. Thank you so much for making the time to come on and share all your expertise and knowledge in so many different areas. It's truly so helpful to people early in their careers, and I guess other legal leaders who are wondering what is going on in your world at the moment. So just a huge thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.